The One Piece manga's recent revelations about the true nature of the world government may cause the Navy to defect and rise against the Celestial Dragons during the final saga. This includes every single Marine from the lowest recruit all the way up to Fleet Admiral Sakazuki. For starters, let's look at the Marines themselves and what makes them different from the other characters we've seen working for the world government. By and large, the Marines are very clearly good people. While the Straw Hats have encountered their fair share of immoral and corrupt Marines on their journeys, these have clearly been the exception rather than the rule. Most Marines seemingly enlist for the same reasons as someone like Kobe, where they want to protect innocent civilians from pirates and other villains. This does not mean that most Marines like the government or the Celestial Dragons, but simply tolerate them because they think they are a lesser evil compared to pirates. Sengoku brings this up when he fights Blackbeard at the end of the Marineford arc, where he states that the Marine HQ is a symbol for civilians everywhere that justice will protect them from the evils of the world. However, there is one major problem with this belief. As mentioned before, most Marines probably view the government as the lesser of two evils when compared to pirates. This is probably only because the government is much better at hiding their darker side to the public. The world government is actually far more evil of an entity than the people in the One Piece world, including the Marines, realize. As we've recently discovered, they are actually the ones behind the One Piece world being filled with water, and they only plan on furthering this process until the whole world sinks. This, however, may only be the tip of the iceberg regarding all the horrible things the government has done or plans on doing. As they've covered up most of their evil deeds throughout history, even readers are only now beginning to realize just how evil Imu's regime actually is. The final saga itself began with the government literally wiping off a country from the map. Since they're in possession of a weapon that is able to do this, one can only wonder how many other countries have suffered Lulusia Kingdom's fate in the 800 years the Celestial Dragons have been in power. The key issue the government has with keeping the Marines loyal is that it's entirely dependent on the Marines being unaware of just how evil their bosses truly are. In reality, the government poses a far greater threat to the civilians than pirates do. Arguably, this is also the biggest reason why the government is dead set on hiding the true history. The Marines turning on the Celestial Dragons is essentially a nightmare scenario for them, and one of the biggest ramifications that can happen if the truth of the world is revealed. These Egghead arc revelations about the government, however, do not come out of nowhere. Throughout the present One Piece story, the world government's public facade has slowly started to crack. Notably, many Marines have already started to become disillusioned with the system. After the Straw Hats defeated Crocodile at Alabasta, the government, to the dismay of Smoker, credited the Marines with the victory. Likewise, after the mass breakout of Impel Down, Sengoku can hardly believe that the government is going to endanger civilians by not telling them about the escaped level 6 prisoners only to save face. And while this video is about the entirety of the Marines defecting, they would hardly be the first. Marines like Saul, Sentomaru and Dragon have already been pushed far enough by the government to make them quit the service and rise against their former masters. These examples may, however, only be a prelude to a mass defection of Marines in the story. In the last few arcs, the government has only doubled down on showing their true face to the world. According to Saint Venus Juro, the government is no longer focused on protecting the balance of the world, and, in his own words, is going to start a great cleansing. In practice, this means that the government has now essentially gone on a war path. They're willing to wipe entire countries off the map, manipulate the news to fit their narrative, invade neutral nations like Wano, kidnap the princess of Alabasta, and even mark the world-beloved scientist Dr. Vegapunk as a traitor who needs to be eliminated. These are all things that will clearly hurt the public perception of the world government. But Imu and the Gorosei are apparently past the point of caring. As if all of this wasn't bad enough, this is happening at the same time as the world is finally beginning to learn the truth of the Void Century. Vegapunk revealing that the government may cause the entire world to sink underwater is a complete bombshell, and will undoubtedly shake the entire world. The natural question to ask is, how many more incidents and revelations like this are the Marines willing to take before their trust in the government is completely eroded? As addressed before, the Marines by and large only serve the government and Celestial Dragons because they're seen as less evil than the pirates. But as we just discussed, they are finally starting to realize the truth. The world government is for all intents and purposes run like a pirate empire. It is a military dictatorship that plunders the wealth of others through high taxes while enslaving the rest to the benefit of those in power. Yet, unlike the Yonko who only rule small patches of the sea, the government is doing this on a global scale. This is all on top of the fact that they pose an existential threat to the survival of the entire world. At this point in the story, it's essentially only a matter of time which event or revelation will finally cause the Marines to start thinking about abandoning the government. The news about the entire world sinking may well be the last drop for the Navy, and cause a civil war to erupt between them and the government. However, as said in the very beginning, this video isn't about just some but all of the Marines defecting the world government. To finally address the big red elephant in the room, would any of the revelations about the government be enough to convince Fleet Admiral Sakazuki to abandon them? Akainu is a ruthless bastard who was pushed for the position of Fleet Admiral by the Celestial Dragons themselves. He also has a downright manic hatred for criminals, and is even willing to execute his own brothers in arms if they get in the way of his justice. Someone like Aokichi even left the Marines when the alternative was serving under Akainu. For context, Aokichi was still willing to stay with the Marines even after the Ohara incident. Yet the idea of Akainu as the Fleet Admiral was too much for him. As Akainu is already willing to do things like kill civilians in the name of the government, it can be very hard to believe that he would abandon them no matter what skeletons they have in their closet. This next part of the video is however going to be talking about exactly that. Despite what one might think at a first glance, there has arguably been a rift forming between Akainu and the government ever since the former got his position as the Fleet Admiral. This rift also seemingly goes both ways, as with every interaction we see of them, the Celestial Dragons are also fed up with Akainu. In his very first scene after the time skip, Akainu is seen being disgruntled with the Gorosei for letting a pirate like Doflamingo manipulate them with his fake announcement of retiring from the warlords. The Gorosei only fire back at Akainu, blaming him for Aokichi having joined up with the Blackbeard pirates. This isn't just a one-off scene however. With virtually every scene we see of the Celestial Dragons in the post-time skip, they only ever have bad things to say about Akainu. Likewise, Akainu is also consistently shown being annoyed at how passive and powerless the role of the Fleet Admiral actually is. Akainu also probably has no love for the Celestial Dragons in the first place. Based on the one image we've seen of his childhood, Akainu likely grew up very rough, which is in stark contrast to the pampering and wealth the Celestial Dragons are born into. This Dressrosa scene also brings up a theme about Akainu's relationship with his bosses, where the Gorosei are consistently withholding information from him. The reason why Akainu is meeting with the elders here is because they've clearly kept him out of the loop on why Doflamingo is able to blackmail them. This withholding of information is seen once again during the Egghead arc, where Akainu was seemingly not even aware that Saint Saturn was planning on invading Egghead Island along with Kizaru. The Gorosei by their own admission only view Akainu and the Marines as just a tool, whose main purpose is to serve as muscle and to create the appearance of justice being served in the world. Whenever the government wants to do something more heinous, be it spying on aligned countries, recruiting child soldiers, or even annexing neutral nations, they use their other servants like Cypherpole instead. Akainu clearly isn't a fan of any of this. As the head of the Marines, he is evidently annoyed that the government has a completely different military branch he has no apparent control over. We see this in Akainu's aforementioned talk about Doflamingo, where he simply thinks of Cypherpole as goons of the Celestial Dragons. Then later during Egghead, we see just how little power Akainu has over CP0, where Lucci downright disobeys his command about not engaging the Straw Hats. Akainu's grievances with Cypherpole are arguably even more warranted than he himself realizes. During the Wano arc, CP0 were conducting arms deals with Kaido all without the Navy's knowledge. This is actually a point that I think deserves more emphasis. The government's literally brokering arms deals with pirates without the Marines' knowledge or consent. When Drake actually discovered what CP0 were doing in Wano, the agents also literally tried to kill him. This is a pretty good example of just how much of a rift there is between the Marines and the rest of the government. The government is also clearly aware that their deals with pirates are something the Navy shouldn't know about. This not only shows how dysfunctional the world government apparatus is, but also how much the government is actually afraid of the Marines discovering their darker side. One final source of frustration for Akainu about his current position is how he can never actually get personally involved in anything, which goes completely against his nature. As seen when he was still an admiral, Akainu is relentless in his mission to bring evildoers to justice. During Marineford, Akainu was by far the most active combatant on the government side, where he took out several high-ranking enemies, destroyed Whitebeard's flagship, and did most of the heavy damage to Whitebeard himself. Akainu was even the person who originally manipulated Squart to stab Whitebeard. Then immediately after the war, despite having just fought an Emperor of the Sea, Akainu was already pursuing the Blackbeard pirates before they escaped to the New World. The way Greenpool describes him, Akainu is a man who takes no half measures. Yet, as the Fleet Admiral, Akainu is essentially forced to be just that, where he's chained to a desk and never gets to involve himself in the world's affairs. With every event involving the Navy in the post-time skip One Piece world, Akainu always has to sit back and let other marines do the actual work. Akainu himself complains about this, for example, when Blackbeard engages with Law on Winter Island, saying that he never expected the position of Fleet Admiral to be so passive. Even before these revelations about the government, Akainu might have already harbored ideas of how much better things would be if he was the one truly in charge. If it were up to Akainu, he'd probably much rather be someone like Garp, where he'd get to use his personal might to bring down pirates on top of leading the marines. To summarize all of this, while one at a glance might see Akainu as the government's top man, this is actually not the case. Despite originally pushing him to the position, the Gorosei and the Celestial Dragons do not trust or appreciate Akainu. Saturn even goes as far as to literally call Akainu impotent over letting Robin go on Ohara all those years ago. Akainu's position as the Fleet Admiral is also clearly not what it was cracked up to be. Even though he is the literal head of the Marines, he is just another cog in the government machine. The elders keep Akainu out of the loop on a lot of the government's important affairs, and force him to stay in headquarters as a glorified guard dog to the Holy Land. Akainu is also clearly aware of his situation. After fighting Kuma in Marie Choice, Akainu reflects on Kuma being a mere puppet with no mind or will left. It's actually possible that Akainu is comparing Kuma to himself here. Even though he hasn't had his mind literally deleted like Kuma, Akainu is very much just a puppet of the government. Fittingly, Akainu thinks about this just as the Celestial Dragons are in the background chiding him over being a failure as a Fleet Admiral. In short, Akainu has plenty of reasons to already be resentful of the world government. If the government's true nature finally becomes clear to him, Akainu may well reach his breaking point and quit the whole system. It could be that the news of the world sinking will be the last straw for him. However, even if that turns out to not be the case, there's plenty of other reasons for Akainu to jump ship, such as him finding out the government has been doing weapons deals with pirates, or that the world is actually being ruled by a secret tyrant in Imu. The next part of the video will address the likely reality of the entirety of the Marines choosing to follow Akainu if he decides to defect from the government. As addressed before, most Marines are by and large morally good characters whose main drive is in protecting the public. If there is going to be a big enough revelation about the government that will cause Akainu to quit, it stands to reason that said revelation will simultaneously cause a lot of other Marines to do the same. It can actually be safely predicted that all three current admirals would follow in Akainu's footsteps in leaving the government. Kizaru is someone who throughout the Egghead arc has shown that he is already very conflicted, as the government is now commanding him to eliminate his friends in Vegapunk, Sentomaru, Bonnie and Kuma. If Kizaru is already starting to question his loyalties over this, Akainu quitting the Marines could be what will finally cause him to flip. For context, Akainu and Kizaru both hail from the North Blue and joined the Marines at the same time decades ago. Based on everything we've seen in the story, the two appear to be genuine friends with a lot of respect for one another. If Kizaru is already very conflicted about serving the government, it's very hard to see him sticking by if his best friend decides to defect. The second admiral to probably flip along with Akainu is Greenbull. This doesn't take a lot of puzzling out, as during his introduction scene in Wano, Greenbull downright admits that he's a fan of Akainu. Greenbull's adoration goes as far as him being willing to fight the newly minted Yonko crew and all their allies in Wano, just to get a thumbs up from Akainu for giving him Luffy's head. Then there is Fujitora, who is also very likely to leave the government alongside Akainu. Fujitora is already perhaps the marine most critical of the government, where he did everything in his power so that the government couldn't cover up Doflamingo's downfall at Dressrosa. And while Akainu and Fujitora don't see completely eye to eye, Akainu showed that he's willing to let bygones be bygones after Fujitora went through with his plan to abolish the warlords. In honesty, Fujitora is seemingly already anti-government enough that he might even rebel before Akainu. If the four highest ranked Marines were willing to defect the government, the rest of the Marines would probably not be far behind. According to the manga, only Admirals and the Fleet Admiral are the ones who deal directly with the Celestial Dragons. This is for example the reason why Garp always refused to be promoted to Admiral, as he didn't want to be under the Celestial Dragon's thumb. What this essentially means is that every Marine ranked Vice Admiral and below barely has any connection to the upper echelons of the government. If they were to get the news that all of the Marine top brass has rebelled against the government, many of them could well follow their superior officers rather than the elusive Celestial Dragons they've only heard bad things about. This is even more likely to happen because many of the other big names left in the Marines have already shown themselves to be very very critical of the Celestial Dragons and the government. As brought up before in the video, Garp, Sengoku and Smoker have all for years been disillusioned with the government. Garp and Sengoku especially are two legendary heroes of the Marines who are likely very popular among the rank and file. If they were to jump ship along with Akainu and the three admirals, it's hard to see almost any Marine sticking to the government. We've seen that when push comes to shove, Marines by nature follow their superior officers even if they go against the world government's orders. This can for example be seen whenever characters like Garp, Tashiki, Smoker or Fujitora decide to go against their orders and not chase the Straw Hats. Even if their subordinates disagree, they still fall in line and follow the orders of their direct superiors. To summarize, all the big names among the Marines are currently in differing stages of being fed up with the government. If someone like Akainu were to reach his breaking point and leave, it could very well be that Kizaru, Fujitora, Green Bull, Garp, Sengoku and all the remaining high-profile Marines would follow him. And if this in turn were to happen, virtually all of the remaining Marines would fall like dominoes, as they'd be far more likely to follow their direct superiors over the tyrannical Celestial Dragons. One might question if this would even be a good thing for the One Piece story. Everything about the story has been building up to a climax where Luffy will finally end the world government's centuries-long tyranny. If this is indeed the endgame of the story, the government losing one of their greatest powers in the Marines defecting could significantly lower the stakes of the final war. The Marines staying loyal to the government could well be necessary for Luffy and all of his allies not to just run through the Celestial Dragons. I personally think this argument used to have a lot of merit, but then everything we knew about the world government changed in the final saga. Namely, the world government even without the Marines is probably by far the most powerful group on the planet, and they are more than strong enough to serve their role as antagonists in the story's climax. This next part of the video will briefly go over just how strong the government is based on the information given in the final saga. Before we get to that, however, I'd like to ask you to enlist in this channel's very own Marine Corps by subscribing. And if you're not exactly strapped for cash, you could consider paying the heavenly tribute by becoming a channel member. We first discovered that the reason why the government was able to abolish the warlord system was because of the creation of the Seraphim, who are cloned cyborg versions of the former warlords. On top of being clones of the warlords, the Seraphim also possess attributes of the Lunarians, giants, as well as handpicked devil fruit abilities. Vegapunk describes the Seraphim as being the strongest form of humanity, and while they are still children, one can only speculate how powerful they grow to be within the last few arcs of the story. The Seraphim themselves obey the Five Elders above anyone else, even over the Vegapunks. This means that unlike the Marines, the Seraphim could stay loyal to the government to the bitter end. Another big revelation during the Egghead arc is that the Five Elders can not only fight but are potentially some of the strongest fighters in the whole world. Since they've landed on Egghead Island, the Gorosei have been shown being able to recover from every manner of attack thrown at them. This includes attacks from Gear 5th Luffy, who in the very same arc has managed to take a Navy Admiral out of commission with these very same attacks. The Gorosei have also demonstrated Haki so strong that it can shake islands and make characters as strong as Lucci and Jinbei refer to it as being insane and preposterous. While this video won't speculate on how powerful exactly the Elders are, the simple fact that they're able to hold their own against an Emperor of the Sea in Luffy probably puts them in the upper echelons of power in the One Piece world. As if the Seraphim and the Gorosei weren't enough, however, the Egghead arc also introduced the God's Knights as a completely new group within the world government. While the only thing we truly know of the God's Knights is that they're an order of fighters among the Celestial Dragons, some things already indicate that they're quite powerful. When Dragon brings up the God's Knights, he believes that the revolutionary army's real fight would only begin once they're mobilized. Keeping in mind, the revolutionaries have already had regular engagements with the likes of Navy Admirals. Furthermore, from what little we saw of the God Valley incident in Kuma's flashback, Commander Figureland Carling was confident enough that the God's Knights could fight the Rocks Pirates and the Roger Pirates. While we don't see the actual fighting, these are two of the strongest known pirate crews in history. If the God's Knights were able to put up even a semblance of a fight, it would be very impressive considering who they were up against. On top of all of these forces, the Egghead arc also introduced the government's mobile super weapon at the beginning of the arc, which is able to level entire islands. The power this weapon displayed at Lucia Kingdom alone was already enough for Monkey D. Dragon to compare it to an ancient weapon. And based on Vegapunk's words in chapter 1115, Dragon's prediction may have been right on the money. If all of this wasn't convincing enough, the government also now has the loyalty of York, one of the Vegapunks. With York's knowledge and skill, it could be that the government is able to keep producing all the things Dr. Vegapunk originally gave them, be it the Mother Flame energy source or more Seraphim. The concept of more Seraphim in itself is essentially a bottomless pool of power. If in theory all the government needs is the DNA of the person they want to clone, they could create Seraphim of, for example, all of the known admirals as well as all of the powerful pirates they've held captive over the years. The latter possibility could include characters such as Shiki, Kaido, and even Goldie Roger himself. To tally all of this up, the government we knew before Final Saga and during the Final Saga are two completely different animals in terms of military strength. The Gorosei, Seraphim, and God's Knights by themselves are potentially stronger than multiple Yonko crews put together. Add to this a possible ancient weapon, armies of Pacifista and Cypherpol agents, as well as wildcards such as Commander-in-Chief Kong or Vice Admiral Magellan. And this is not even mentioning Imu himself, who is the likely victor of the war against the Ancient Kingdom and possibly the One Piece character with by far the most experience, considering that he could have lived for centuries and still be in his prime. One final thing I want to mention is that despite everything, the government is also in a great position to create new alliances. If the world is actually going to sink, the government could offer powerful characters land on the red line in exchange for their power. They could even offer them Celestial Dragon status in exchange for loyalty, like they've done with York. As just one example, Blackbeard has already shown interest in becoming a member of the world government and might well accept this kind of a deal. The world government is also likely by far the richest faction in the One Piece world. This means that they could also simply just buy more fighters, such as mercenaries and bounty hunters with cold hard cash. All of this is to say, the world government are probably more than powerful enough antagonists even without the Marines. Depending on how strong the Seraphim and God's Knights actually end up being, it could even be that the Marines defecting from the government is a necessary plot point for there to be any chance of bringing Imu down. By the way, as a brief interlude, I actually have no idea what Kong would do if the entire navy were to defect from the government. Kong is not only a former Marine, but he was the Fleet Admiral before Sengoku. However, as we know so little about him, it's possible that he's actually fully committed to the world government cause and will follow them no matter what. The final major thing I would like to discuss with this video is what the story would actually look like if the Marines were to leave the government. If this actually happened, I'm fairly certain the Marines would become their own faction. While they might later join Luffy, this would more than likely not happen immediately. Even if the Marines realize that the world government is bad news, this is still not the same as them joining forces with criminals. Most of the Marines would probably still view fighting pirates as their duty, even if they stopped being on the government's payroll. This is fairly justifiable, since pirates like Blackbeard and Bucky will keep targeting civilians regardless of what the government does. And yes, despite what one might think, protecting the innocent is something Akainu actually does care about. When trying to stop Kuma at Marie Choice, Akainu himself says that Kuma running amok is a threat to the public. On the topic of Akainu, his personal grievances are also probably the reason why the Marines would be their own independent group that wouldn't ally with anyone else. While Akainu hates all criminals, he seems to have a particular disdain for Dragon and Luffy. When he first sees Luffy at Marineford, Akainu considers him to be the one person who cannot be allowed to live, which means that Akainu considered Luffy to be an even bigger target than Whitebeard. This is seemingly connected to Luffy being Dragon's son, as that is what Akainu repeatedly refers to him as during the arc. What's also interesting is that Akainu already knew that Luffy was Dragon's son before Sengoku announced it to everyone. Considering that Dragon is a former Marine and that he's the same age as Akainu, it could be that the two have a history, and that Akainu's reasons for hating him are personal. Since Akainu would more than likely be unwilling to ally with any of the Yonko or the revolutionaries, a more likely outcome would be that the Marines would simply be doing their own thing. From the world government's perspective, this would essentially just make the Marines one big pirate crew, and while Akainu would obviously reject this title, it is ironic that if he left the government, he would be repeating what Aokichi did after losing their fight at the beginning of the time skip. What's also interesting is that Aokichi is the character who might have indirectly foreshadowed Akainu eventually leaving the government. When talking to Smoker on Punk Hazard, Aokichi says that there are things you can only do in the world if you are independent. Leaving the government might finally allow Akainu to lead the Marines the way he's always wanted. With him no longer having to answer to the Gorosei, Akainu could by himself decide when and where to use the navy. Furthermore, Akainu would no longer be stuck to a desk and could personally take part in the Marines' missions. Next, the video will go over what an independent faction of Marines led by Akainu would look like in practice. For starters, Akainu would probably not be sticking around for long in New Marineford. The Marine HQ is located right next to the Holy Land, and Akainu would probably not be ready to face off against the government immediately after his defection. This is due to the simple fact that the Marine forces are spread throughout the globe, whereas the Celestial Dragon's forces are concentrated at Marie Choice. It could make more sense for Akainu to relocate his HQ somewhere else and start gathering his forces there. One idea would be for Akainu to move to one of the Marine bases located in the New World, such as G5 or G14. The New World is the one location of the world the government has the least control of, making it ideal for Marines that have risen against the government. The New World is also where all of the Yonko are located, meaning that Akainu moving there could mean that he could also quickly react to the Emperor's movements. This, in my opinion, is actually a very cool premise for the final war of One Piece, where there would be several factions across the seas vying for supremacy. Instead of Luffy simply rallying all of his allies and challenging Imo to one final showdown, it would be an actual world war with the government, Marines, revolutionaries and the pirates all fighting each other across the planet. In my opinion, we've already seen this war start during the Egghead arc, with several engagements happening across the world that do not even involve the Straw Hats or the government. Arguably, this is the climax the One Piece story has been building up towards for decades by introducing so many different factions and characters to the story. This was perhaps made most apparent by Doflamingo's speech after Dressrosa, where he went through all of the major players of the world and said that they'd soon be starting the war for supremacy. Doffy even downright brings the Marines up as their own faction during this speech. Akainu and the Marines' ultimate goal in this war would probably be something along the lines of becoming the dominant force of justice on the planet by taking out both the government and all the criminals that plague the world. One very interesting idea is that the Marines would try to achieve this by themselves being the ones who tried to find the One Piece and discovering the true history. This could be just because they want to find out the true nature of the government or because they believe that the One Piece itself would give them access to ancient weapons. Either way, this would be a rather surprising twist for Akainu's character, as the first thing we see him do in the entire story is killing civilians in order to stop people from finding out that very history. This would actually be reminiscent of an old interview by Eiichiro Oda, where he said that Akainu could find the One Piece in a year if he wanted to. While the hunt for the One Piece is currently between Luffy, Shanks, Blackbeard and Bucky, the Marines being added to the mix could be rather interesting and make Luffy truly earn the title of Pirate King. One last thing I want to discuss in this video is actually in regards to Luffy's character. At one point or another in the future of the story, Luffy is likely going to have to face Akainu. As the person who killed Ace, Akainu is probably the person Luffy hates the most in the world. This is seen in how Luffy reacts when people mention Akainu, where it seems to genuinely bring up his past trauma, which is something that no other villain, not even Blackbeard, is able to do to Luffy. For a long time, the pathway for these two characters seemed fairly set, where Akainu would be one of the big enemies Luffy would have to defeat in order to take down the government by the end of the story. However, if Akainu were to defect, that could make what will happen between him and Luffy potentially much more interesting. While a fight between Luffy and Akainu could still happen, another idea is that the two of them would have to join forces in order to defeat Imo. As Mihawk pointed out during Marineford, Luffy's greatest strength isn't his personal power but his ability to make allies wherever he goes. Luffy having to ally with the person he hates the most could in a way be Luffy's ultimate test, one that he couldn't conquer by simply punching through it. It could also work the same way for Akainu, where he would have to see that Luffy is innocent in whatever happened between him and Dragon, and that just like the government wasn't what Akainu thought it was, neither are all pirates the villains he sees them as. This could give a lot of potential depth to Akainu's character. If Akainu were to not only turn against the government but also be willing to work alongside pirates for the greater good, he'd have essentially completely flipped his entire worldview. For a character whose first scene in the story involved him blowing up a ship full of innocent civilians in the name of the government, this could be quite an incredible character arc. This video has now pretty much covered all the ideas I wanted to discuss about Akainu leading the Marines to defect from the world government. I'm not entirely convinced it will actually end up happening, but I do think it would be a massive net positive for the story. A scenario where the Marines would be their own faction fighting against both pirates and the Celestial Dragons in the final saga is way more interesting of a path for them than any other that I've heard. What's more, Akainu of all characters going against the government and carving out his own path has the potential to make him one of the most complex characters in the whole story. Before I wrap this whole thing up, I'd like to bring up a funny story that happened during the production of this video. While I was writing the script, I noticed that Mr. Morch uploaded a video of the exact same topic. Not only that, but our thumbnails also had the exact same idea behind them, with Akainu smoking a cigar and saying that he's going to quit. This is rather funny, as this is a video I've been planning for months now, And I even got done designing my own thumbnail all the way back in January. I guess this just shows how One Piece content creators can by coincidence think along extremely similar lines. For the record, I still haven't actually watched Morge's video, so I have no idea how different or similar it is to this video in terms of the actual content. Anyway, if you'd like to hear more of my ideas about the possible endgame of One Piece, you should check out this video, where I go over how Law and Kid might end up surpassing Goldie Roger by the end of the story. Thanks a lot for watching this video all the way to the end.